The abolitionist movement is one of my favorite historical topics because it is always salient. What is the abolitionist movement? It is a group of Americans who saw something systemic, institutional, ingrained, entrenched in the American system, American government, American polity, American way of life, and they strategized, fought to get it eradicated. The abolitionist mindset is if you don't like something about your country, change it. If you don't like something about your country, change it on every level in the minds of Americans, in the legal system, in the institutions, in the practices, in the government. Change it. If you don't like it, change it. And it will often be over the long haul. You don't know if you'll succeed. Perhaps you have in our quiet moments, you wonder what we really believe. So you are working toward this end of the eradication of this justice, this injustice, the eradication of slavery. But do you really believe that what now exists in the nation, it is a part of the warp and woof of the early republic? Do you really believe that that can be terminated? So it's the long haul. It's the long game. As people may say today, you're playing chess and not checkers. And you have to systematically, surgically eradicate this evil. This is the abolitionist movement. I love it. What is abolitionism? We want to know this for the final. What is abolitionism? It's the movement to end slavery and emancipate captive African Americans in the United States. Movement denotes a concerted, organized effort, not pell-mell, not helter-skelter, not here and there. This is a concerted movement, all to a preeminent goal, a shared goal. And an abolitionist is someone who does something, does something to end slavery. They do something to end slavery. So perhaps there's been in historiography, there's been a lot of discussion about abolitionists and those who are anti-slavery and the difference. Maybe anti-slavery is just someone who believes that slavery is bad for America, whereas abolitionists believe slavery is bad for America. They want it ended and they do something to end it. And so they're usually a part of an organization with the goal of ending slavery, and they are politically involved. That politics is an all-encompassing term. You know, we've now basically concluded that almost anything you do is political, but this is overtly toward eradicating slavery. So you are overtly, explicitly, intentionally doing things to undermine and ultimately end slavery. What are the dates of the abolitionist movement? As we know, as long as there has been slavery, there have been some sort of people who want it ended. And we've discussed in this class Olaudah Equiano, Phyllis Wheatley, Crispus Attucks, Richard Allen, Jarena Lee, on and on of Black people, white people, Native Americans, Spanish, French, British, who want slavery abolished. But we say that the abolitionist movement sort of formally organized in the early 1830s. Formally organized in the early 1830s. So if you put 1830, that's fine. If you put that the abolitionist movement started in 1830, that is fine. And it ended effectively with emancipation in 1865. What are some of the things that kicked off the abolitionist movement? David Walker's appeal. This is one of the central tenets of this lecture. Abolitionism was about Black people because, as we covered, slavery was race-based. That is, it was only for Black people in America in the antebellum period. Black people could be enslaved. Black people were enslaved. It was based on your Blackness that you were enslaved. It was generational. It was heritable, all with Black people. Okay, so abolitionist starts with Black people. I'm going to share a quote from a abolitionist scholar shortly, but this is a monumental publication. It appeared in 1829 and then in 1830, just before David Walker's death. That's his son, Edward G. Walker. And this periodical, this pamphlet, booklet, argued for the immediate emancipation of slavery, and it was a call to arms of Black people, particularly Black captives, to overthrow slavery. We can add violently in there. I think that's obvious, but to violently overthrow this unjust system. And this is a bit prophetic by David Walker because slavery ultimately had to be violently overthrown. And I believe, many scholars believe, that the tide turned with the Emancipation Proclamation during the Civil War when Black men could serve in the Union Army. So in a way, David Walker's prophecy, if you will, was fulfilled in the American Civil War. Of course, Nat Turner's rebellion in Southampton, Virginia in 1831, the most successful slave revolt in American history. About 55 white people were killed, including the entire family of Nat Turner's masters. And I think about 36 Black people were killed in the uprising. So this is important. What is the point of this? Black people did not want to be enslaved. Black people wanted to be free. This may be obvious now, but the propaganda machines, which were heavily backed by powerful interest and corporations and systems, propagandized that Black people were hunky-dory, happy in slavery, and that it wasn't in their nature to want to be free. This was, of course, a lie. And what put the motor, the engine, in the abolitionist movement is that Black people do not want to be enslaved. And indeed, in the case of Nat Turner, they will risk their lives to not be captive anymore. And then also in 1831, William Lloyd Garrison started the Liberator. And this was the major abolitionist periodical, I would say, along with Frederick Douglass's North Star and the Frederick Douglass paper. And there were myriad others. But William Lloyd Garrison started the Liberator in 1831. And it's important to note that the Liberator was primarily, really throughout its whole run, supported by Black people, by free Black people. That was the Liberator's audience, primary audience. So here's the quote from Manisha Sinha This is a magisterial history of the abolitionist movement. Sinha writes, slave resistance, not bourgeois liberalism. So in other words, not just good white people, not just humanitarian white people, slave resistance, Black people wholeheartedly not wanting to be enslaved, Black people with the desiderata of freedom. So it was slave resistance, not bourgeois liberalism, that lay at the heart of the abolition movement. The actions of slave rebels and runaways, Black writers and community leaders, did not lie outside of, but shaped abolition and its goals. Very important. As most abolitionists understood, the story of abolition must begin with the struggles of the enslaved. The connection between slave resistance and abolition in the United States was proximate. That means right next to it, nearby, and continuous. Prominent slave revolts marked the turn toward immediate abolition. That's an important phrase, immediate abolition. Fugitive slaves united all factions of the movement and led abolitionists to justify revolutionary resistance to slavery. Recent historians have declared Black resistance to enslavement passe, like it didn't matter or it didn't matter much. But, Sinha writes, Black resistance was central to abolition. This is an important concept, the foundation of abolitionism. And this is sort of common sense, but it deserves repetition. You do not work for the freedom of someone who doesn't want to be free. If there's little desire to be free, a movement can't grow up around you to free you. And in this lecture, I will be speaking of Black people, enslaved Black people, as both being freed and both freeing themselves. So I'm aware of the tension there and the dynamics there. So sometimes I will make it seem like enslaved Black people need to be freed. Other times I will make it, I will speak for them and saying that they are freeing themselves. They are working for their own freedom. So it's both. But this is the foundation of abolitionism. Black people do not want to be enslaved. They want to be free. This is very interesting. Abolitionism was never popular. At its height, before the Civil War, maybe in the 1850s, some people may argue in the late 1830s, the late Andrew Jackson presidency, but probably in the 1850s, only about 2% of Northerners were abolitionists. Now, this number skyrocketed after the Civil War when everyone said that they were abolitionists. Oh yeah, I ran an underground station in my house. You know what I'm saying? I was a conductor in the Underground Railroad. Hey, I went to the Upper South and helped emancipate slaves. Everybody was an abolitionist after the war. But when it counted and when it mattered, historians estimate that at most there were only about 2% of Northerners who were abolitionists. And this is perhaps a continual thread, definitely throughout American history, probably throughout wider history, and that is the right, justice, righteousness, if you will, is never popular. Think about that. Think about that. All right, so what was the task of abolitionists? What was the abolitionist task? We touched on this a little bit in this class. When the abolition movement began, 1831, there were approximately 2.3 million enslaved Black people in the United States. Slavery was fully legal, greatly benefiting the government and citizens. The system was entrenched, existing from the beginnings of America. Remember that we said that it greatly helped fund the colonies, fund the British colonies, and then fund the American Revolution, really on both sides, the side of the colonials and the side of the British. So this is integral to the founding and the growing up of America, and its rise to a global power, a superpower. And with the founding fathers and other respectable white people owning slaves. So we said 12 presidents, probably out of the first, what, 18? It's up there, owned Black people. Up to that time, every US president owned slaves, and slaves had in fact helped build and maintain the White House itself. Many other American institutions, from colleges to insurance companies, were built on slave labor. The goods that Americans used, food and clothes and technology, were largely produced by slave labor. The vast majority of US citizens supported slavery and could not even contemplate it not existing. The slave institution was deeply American. It was the status quo. To use an anachronistic phrase, slavery was as American as apple pie and baseball. The abolitionist task was to end slavery, was to eradicate slavery. Right? How do you do it? How do you do it? So here are some abolitionist approaches. And the first one is what will prevail. Black people, enslaved Black people, should be free immediately. Immediately. Others, probably in the early movement, there were textures and types of abolitionism, but Black slaves should be free, but gradually. There were many schemes for the ending of slavery. Black slaves should be free and then sent to Africa. Black slaves should be freed in a way that is conducive and acceptable to white slave owners. There were all sorts of reparation schemes to remunerate white slave owners for emancipating Black people. Slavery can continue to exist, but must not be allowed to expand. Keep in mind that in 1830, America had expanded to about today's Midwest. And so, through manifest destiny, America was expanding. Obviously, with the Louisiana Purchase, that whole swath, we would say even the Western Midwest, but that was still being, quote unquote, settled. And so with each new territory, new piece of territory, there was a pitched battle over whether it would be slave or free, whether slavery would exist there or not. And then Black slaves should be freed and segregated in Black living spaces. So people were trying to, and this is actually a complex thing, because everybody says, okay, let's free them immediately. I mean, that's what you're thinking when you're hearing this lecture. But then the question is, would people go for that? Would it be better, would be a better strategy to sort of assuage them or kowtow to them to get them to get on board with freeing Black people so that they would be more amenable to doing it? So it was about strategy. What could be acceptable to everyone? Sort of lead everyone, do leadership that would be democratic. So what would be the best for everybody? So many abolitionists saw this as it definitely was an overtly political act, but by political, they're saying, how can we please everybody and ultimately get our goal if most people would disagree with immediatism? Could they consider something more gradual and something agreeable to all? So this is the dance that many of them initially did, but then all along, but then I would say most abolitionists became immediatist. End it now. End it now. So immediate abolitionism means enslave Black people, the system of slavery. Um, Black people must be emancipated, and the system of slavery must end now. It must be terminated now. There can be no truck with gradualism. There can be no truck with colonizationism, which is freeing Black people and then sending them, back to Africa or Haiti. No, it immediately emancipate Black people and enfranchise them as citizens. So this becomes the clarion goal. All right, a little bit of the abolitionist timeline. I want you to know something of these dates and events, and really know the broader trajectory. And by the way, this trajectory is, by that term, I in no way mean that it's forever going up and that there aren't ups and downs, mountains and valleys of the abolitionist movement. All right, we talked about David Walker's appeal, William Lloyd Garrison, the liberator, Nat Turner's rebellion. In 1833, the first major society of abolitionists is formed. It's called the AASS. That's the acronym, American Anti-Slavery Society. Frederick Douglass, thanks to his wife, Anna Murray Douglass, he escaped slavery and becomes an extremely consequential, I would argue, the most consequential abolitionist. The Anti-Slavery Society, AASS, splits in 1840. And this is an ideological split. It's an ideological split. So they all had different notions of how slavery should end and how to go about ending it. The Liberty Party forms, and the Liberty Party is an abolitionist political party. And they put forth presidential candidates in 1840 and 1844. There is a gag rule in Congress during the Jacksonian presidency. I believe it was his second term, and it said that you cannot talk about slavery in Congress. So senators, reps, no politician can mention slavery because the issue had become so controversial and incendiary. People were getting beat up in Congress. Charles Sumner, an abolitionist, was almost caned to death in Congress. But that's a disingenuous way of going about it. The real reason that it was gagged is because Jacksonian Democrats, quote unquote, did not want slavery talked about, because you know that conversations lead to different views and different things being considered. And the Jacksonians just wanted to perpetuate slavery and expand it. So not talking about it would be a better way of doing that than discussing it. Okay, so Frederick Douglass publishes the North Star. I should say that in 1844 and 1845, the Methodist and Baptist churches split over slavery, basically North and South. So even those who were for it, or rather, they were anti-slavery, they were not necessarily abolitionists. So this is very complex. But if you want to simplify it, churches split over the issue of slavery. Some for it and some against it. Once again, that's very simplistic. But the two largest American denominations, the Methodists and the Baptists, split over slavery in 1844 and 1845, and other churches split as well. All right, so the Mexican War yields more Western territory for the United States, and there is, as we said, a pitched battle over territory. So the new territory, will it be slave or free? And of course, that equates to political power. Because remember, what is it, 1787, the 3/5 clause? So an enslaved black person that you own is 3/5 of a political vote. So all of this is about power, money, power, and territory. I guess it's always been about that. So the Compromise of 1850, the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act, which I will argue in the next lecture, which is on the catalyst of the Civil War, is a major catalyst of the Civil War. So the Fugitive Slave Act, this is a reiteration of the act from 1793. It states that Northerners, non-slaveholders, must get involved in slavery in the apprehension of fugitive slaves. So once again, remember that all of this is built on Black people not wanting to be enslaved and wanting freedom more than anything else. So Black people getting their freedom, Black people escaping, has reached such a critical mass that there is a federal law passed to try to curb Black people escaping. So once again, this is going against the narrative of the passive happy slave, or Black people chose to be enslaved, or whatever it is that you've heard. This has reached such a pitch. There are so many Black people escaping, about 1,000 every year is the estimate, that there's a federal, Millard Fillmore, there's a federal act that says that if anyone gets wind of, sees, hears about a fugitive slave, they must report that to authorities. If you don't, you could be fined, you could be jailed, you could be socially ostracized. So this is key. And Northerners are saying, listen, before we were like, you can practice slavery down there. You know, we outlawed it up here. You can practice it down there. We'll buy the goods from slavery. We'll benefit from the money generated from slavery, but keep it out of our faces. We don't want to directly interact with this institution. It's fine where it is, but we don't want to directly interact with it. But the Fugitive Slave Act is saying you will interact. You are bound by law to interact with it. Harriet Beecher Stowe publishes Uncle Tom's Cabin. Once again, this is although she was not an abolitionist per se, Uncle Tom's Cabin is probably one of the, maybe the major publication. Lincoln purportedly remarked to Harriet Beecher Stowe when she visited the White House, "You're the little lady that started this war." And that's through Uncle Tom's Cabin. Think about all of these different tactics of the abolitionists and those who are anti-slavery. I think that they did a masterful job of covering this on all theaters. So Harriet Beecher Stowe really covered it on the novel, and that would be like, I don't know, YouTube or a movie or a television show today. That was the primary form of entertainment. And if you can infuse love for Black people, concern for enslaved Black people, the humanization of Black people into entertainment, and you do it masterfully, you will reach a broad swath of Americans. And that's what Harriet Beecher Stowe did with Uncle Tom's Cabin. So the passage of the Nebraska-Kansas Act, it becomes an all-out war. Remember that we said that America was now, to put it crudely, about the western part of today's Midwest. So the Kansas territory is up for grabs. And there are actual battles, physical, violent battles between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces to win Kansas for their side. And this is probably where John Brown gets radicalized, if you want to use that term. We call John Brown radical, but that's a relative, that's a subjective term. But John Brown actually sheds blood in bleeding Kansas. And the Republican Party forms in 1854. I know that your face is souring, but back then the Republicans were anti-slavery. I know. Um, this is a complex history. You know, some people said that it jumped. So the Republican Party became the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party became the Republican Party. It's a lot more complex than that. But the Republican Party was actually founded on anti-slavery principles, and its first candidate was Abraham Lincoln. Of course, Abraham Lincoln won the presidency. Okay, so the Dred Scott decision, we know about that. Black people are not citizens but property, said uh, Justice Taney. 1858, the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And what does this do? This is putting anti-slavery, or it's putting slavery as the major issue of the 1860 presidential election. John Brown's raid. This is another major catalyst of the Civil War. We'll talk a little bit about that in the catalyst section. Abraham Lincoln is elected, and people often criticize Abraham Lincoln, perhaps rightly so. One of the greatest critics of Abraham Lincoln was Frederick Douglass, but he's criticized for dragging his feet on eradicating slavery. But something's interesting about Abraham Lincoln, just the effect that he had when he was elected president. Southern states started seceding. I think the first one was South Carolina in December 1860. So what did they know about Lincoln? Why did they start seceding? Why did they start leaving the Union when Abraham Lincoln was elected? So the Civil War begins, April 1861. The Emancipation Proclamation issued January 1863. You all know this. And then the 13th Amendment is issued and ratified in 1865, and the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. I should put the Civil War ends before the 13th Amendment is proposed or is voted. I believe that's the case, although I know it's ratified in December. And then Juneteenth, all Black captives are emancipated for our purposes here. We know it's more complex than that, but for our purposes here, all Black captives are emancipated. What were some of this is the stuff. So abolitionists are going for the minds of Americans. So they knew that a key battleground, if you will, of this abolitionist movement is the minds of Americans, is the minds of Americans. So we are going to make a case to Americans on why slavery should end, why slavery is bad, why slavery is not good for America. And I would encourage you all to do this as change makers in our nation. You need to find out what people want and appeal to that, and not necessarily what you would first go to. So I would assume that we would all first go to Black people are fully human and they should not be enslaved. It is immoral, it is unethical, it is unconstitutional. I don't know if we could argue that. It is un-American, perhaps. It is undemocratic to enslave Black people, right? So that's what we would argue. So morally wrong, violated religious principles for those who tend to think religiously, which was a large proportion of the American public purportedly. It's against the Bible, but then you're entering into some more nuanced arguments to impact people who would be moved by this. It degrades white people. Slavery degrades anybody who's involved in this system. You know the phrase, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Slave masters had something near absolute power over enslaved Black people, something near it. Slavery is violent and unseemly. If Black people do not want to be, if Black people are fine being enslaved, then why do you have to force it? Why do you have to whip them? Why is it founded on violence and coercion and restriction? Why do we want this violent institution in America? It damaged America's reputation internationally, and this increasingly continued with the outlawing of the transatlantic slave trade by Britain in 1807 and other countries later. Slavery became uncool internationally, increasingly. It underdeveloped the South. This was another argument that was being made. It was profiting some people in the South greatly. It was profiting the North greatly, corporations, institutions, people, but it was underdeveloping the South. And many people still say that its legacy continues because in the American South, even now in southern states, in the deep South, where slavery was the most prevalent, they are behind in, they are lowest, almost all lowest in education, mortality, health, GDP, income, any major statistic of quality of life. The South is behind, let's say, the North, if you want to speak in an anachronistic language. It displaced free workers. It created a non-equal distribution of power that made it almost impossible for non-slave holding farmers to advance. These were the arguments. It hampered free flow needed for optimal capitalism. Some people were arguing that it kept Black people in America. Remember that this is not all built on racial egalitarianism. Some people had racist motivations for ending slavery. It inhibited urbanization. It inhibited mechanization. Some people said that, okay, we know about the cotton gin and cotton production, but in other ways, it hampers the industrialization of America. And it was invasive. It never stayed in one place. It was a metastasizing cancer that necessarily infected all of the United States. It could not be controlled. All right, what were some of the methods? This is going to be a big question for the final. What were some of the methods used by abolitionists to end slavery? What were some of the methods used by abolitionists to end slavery? This is a very, very important question, consideration. In short, they used everything possible. They used every possible method, at least every viable one. Some of them were even not viable. We could debate if John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia, now West Virginia, was viable. That didn't matter, I think, to John Brown. And it ultimately didn't matter for reverberations, for consequences, because it turned out to be a powerful anti-slavery blow. So viable and non-viable. This is what I would encourage you to do. Just because something doesn't work doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Think about it. You don't know how this will redound. Newspapers and periodicals that denounced slavery, that argued for slavery's end. Other publications, books, pamphlets, tracts, booklets, you get the picture. Broadsides, I mean, there are endless abolitionist tactics, slave narratives, interpersonal communication, oratory, these are speeches, sermons, political organizing, programs and conventions, anti-slavery petitions to local and federal government, voting. So you vote for anti-slavery candidates, you vote for anti-slavery measures, becoming politicians yourselves, international networks, uh, teaching, sermonizing. They call it parochial abolitionism. Everything that you can do to influence minds to be against slavery and to do something to end it. Fundraising, Underground Railroad, of course, assisting fugitive slaves, anti-slavery commerce. So something similar today may be like you refusing to buy fast fashion or clothes that come from sweatshops, perhaps products like blood diamonds, products that are built off of the exploitation of other people, which may be most of them, right? Um, so they were refusing, abolitionists were refusing to buy goods made or profiting, made from or profiting slavery. And so this was meant to undercut the economic juggernaut that perpetuated slavery. Yeah, as I said, teaching abolition in schools, preaching in churches, art. So abolitionist music, poetry, paintings, drawings, leaving pro-slavery organizations. So this included churches, political parties, anything that supports slavery, we are leaving. And violence. So it covers the spectrum. Abolitionist rhetoric, remember that rhetoric is the art of communication. It's just communicating. So they used moral suasion, which is coming at slavery from a morality standpoint. Slavery is immoral. Those who practice it are immoral. Sentimentalism, this is implanting emotions in people that are not there before, or awakening emotions that may lie dormant. So you're starting off, let's say, Uncle Tom's Cabin, not believing that Black people are fully human or not really caring or thinking about enslaved Black people. And Uncle Tom's Cabin, by identifying with enslaved Black people, Uncle Tom, these sympathetic characters, it is developing new emotions or is awakening emotions in you and feelings and affections for Black people. Appeals to religion, appeals to the Bible, appeals to reason, appeal to founding documents. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, endowed by their all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, we the people, things like that. Appeals to national reputation, appeals to the economy. All right, and we have our famous abolitionists. You know these people. We just want to put a face on this. I'm fully aware that there were abolitionists that stayed low key. This was not a popular thing. They stayed low key that deserve a lot of credit as well. But these are our current recognizable faces. They've probably been recognizable for a long time now, of course. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and whenever I mention Frederick Douglass, I do want to give props and honor, homage, homage to Anna Murray Douglass, his wife, who really freed him from slavery. She was the one who masterminded his escape, and his daughter Rosetta Douglass Spragg, who was his basically lifelong assistant in his abolitionist efforts. So shout out to them. William Lloyd Garrison, Sojourner Truth. These are the great abolitionists. Harriet Beecher Stowe, she became abolitionist. I'm not sure if she was abolitionist when she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, and she was certainly into slavery. Someone like William Still, who shares the distinction of being called the father of the Underground Railroad. I think several people have that title, but William Still is definitely up there with it. Our good sister Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, Frances E.W. Harper, powerful writer, poetess, John Brown, and we want to acknowledge the 5 Black men who participated and lost their lives in the Harper's Ferry raid. Oftentimes, we just think it's John Brown and his sons, but there were also 5 Black men involved in the raid. Some of the major abolitionist publications, you know them: Alado Equiano, 1789, Walker's Appeal, 1820-1930, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, 1845, and Douglass's later books, My Bondage, My Freedom. You know these: The Liberator, The North Star, Frederick Douglass Paper, slave narratives. 12 Years a Slave, you've probably seen this movie, the movie 12 Years a Slave, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Of course, we know about slave narratives. What is the point of slave narratives? It is to give Northerners the real story of slavery. This is so powerful because this is those who are enslaved speaking. Those who are enslaved are speaking. You're going to outlaw literacy of enslaved Black people. You are going to try to suppress our voices at every turn, constrict our movements, enslave us. But this is slave narratives are Black people getting their voice out. Everyone who wrote a slave narrative or had it written was once enslaved. And the narrative arc is basic. I'm enslaved. I want to be free. I get my freedom. I am now an abolitionist. And the point of slave narratives is that slavery is evil, it's corrupt, it's destructive, it must be abolished. There is an abolitionist motivation, an abolitionist purpose in slave narratives, and that's to end this corrupt system. Did the abolitionists succeed? I believe they did. I believe they did. So the mechanism, the event that ultimately freed Black people. Remember that we did say that emancipation was on a continuum. So probably by the time of 1865, the 13th Amendment, you know, maybe millions, over a million, definitely, Black people had already gotten their freedom from escaping, from freedom suits, from being manumitted, from fighting in wars and earning their freedom that way, from, I mentioned escaping already, 1,000 per year. What other ways? You name it. And then during the war, some 500,000 got their freedom. They were opportunists. They got their freedom when they saw that the Confederacy was weakened. So this is on a spectrum, but ultimately, 1865, the 13th Amendment, the end of the Civil War, I believe that abolitionists, it is a fact that abolitionists helped bring all of this about. They were integral in increasing the consciousness, moving the political system, wrenching and steering America, particularly the Northerners, in a certain anti-slavery direction, making an appeal to the people. There's a lot of different ways to say it because there are a lot of different aspects of it, but they were integral to that. And they were one of the major dynamics, I believe, that brought about the Civil War and brought about the emancipation of Black people. And this is a interracial, multiracial, multi-gender, multi-age movement that ultimately made America start to live up to their ideals more. All right, so there's an abundance of literature on abolitionism, and I can send you most of these PDFs. You can get most of these PDFs through Howard University. So these are just some latest offerings. People are writing on all types of aspects of the abolitionist movement. You see young abolitionists, children of the anti-slavery movement. There are comparative studies. There are definitely works looking at Black women, because, of course, if most historians are white men, they're going to stress white men, the white savior thing. And then men are going to stress Black men. But women were obviously integral to the abolitionist movement. These are two works by my friends. And so Kevin Burton is talking about apocalyptic abolitionism and how the idea that the world was ending and people who believe that were integral to the abolitionist movement. And Dan Brown talks about the Underground Railroad system between the New York or the US and the Canadian border in the Niagara region. So all of this it may be like a gathering snowball that's coming down, and it's gaining. So all of these sectors of the abolitionist movement were doing their part to end it, and it was just steadily undermining slavery. Okay, so you see some of the books. This is just the tip of the iceberg of the books on abolitionism. Of course, Kelly Carter Jackson, she's doing great work by emphasizing that Black people were not necessarily nonviolent. They were not necessarily peaceful. It takes all kinds, as we say. And so there is a rich and robust tradition of Black forceful Black resistance. So you just see some of the many latest and many books on abolitionism and aspects of it. But as we said, the abolitionists were successful, as in almost every single movement. I would say it has to be a joint effort. It's never done in isolation. And the abolitionists played their part well.